everyone, and welcome to my first paint along tutorial where I give you all of the assets we're working from and we paint and study together. For those of you who don't know me, it's nice to meet you. I'm Pippin, and for everyone else, welcome back. Like I said before, today's structure will be a little bit different. Down in the description, you'll find a link to my Google Drive where you can download all of the assets for this video, including the PSD file, PNGs of all the slides I'll be working from in case you don't use Photoshop or anything compatible with it, and the brushes that I use. Don't get too excited about that last one though. I usually only use like 3 brushes when I'm painting, but they're all in there. While we go through this video, you'll be able to follow along with me on screen to work alongside me while you practice the lesson we have in store. At the end, I've also got a little gift coloring page as a thank you for sticking with me. Remember, as always, if you try out this video and like your results, please tag me in them so I can see. And today we've even got a special hashtag for you to use so that I can see those more easily. That's going to be hashtag ArcherKFaceRender. Also, before we move forward from here, I do want to give a quick note. I will not be teaching you about how to draw specific facial features like the eyes, nose, mouth, ears in this video, because this is primarily for learning about coloring and rendering the skin based on the form and structure of a head. I will be making tutorials on those sometime soon though, so if you'd like to see one facial feature focused on before the others, let me know which one in the comments and I'll prioritize whichever one is most wanted. And lastly, at any point in this video where I am painting along with you, I will try to keep the speed at just 100%, not sped up, so you can see exactly how long it takes me, unless I say so otherwise. During those points in the video, everything I'm saying is also unscripted. It's just me talking about my process. So it gets a little rambly and redundant, but it tells you exactly how my thought process works while I'm painting, and I think that might be important. And so, with all of our explanation stuff out of the way, let's get right to it. So, to start out, let's talk about the basic shape of the head. More or less, it's made of these 2 shapes placed together. Fun fact, I looked up the names of these to see if they were anything cool, and no, they're not. We've got cuboid, which I guess is okay, and trapezoid prism, which where's the flair? Where's the panache? I propose we rename this shape, and from now on, we all refer to it as the trapezingus.
What is wrong with you?
Not to be confused with the trapezius, which is a major muscle formation on your back. Anyways, you flip these bad boys upside down, you put them together, and you basically get this shape, which you can move to any angle, but I've picked these 3 for reasons that will later be revealed. Spoiler alert, I used free references from Adobe stock for the skulls. Not a paid promotion though. Anyways, these shapes matter because they're going to dictate the basics of where your light and shadow fall. For example, if you put light here, you'll get shadows like these. And again, here we'll make these. And here we'll make these ones. You can even have multiple light sources and the shadows will fall in response. If you're wanting some practice here, pause the video and add some new light sources and see how you think the shadow would sit. We figured out the basics of lighting on a box and a trapezingus, so let's talk about these shapes in relation to skulls. If you put those shapes around them and use those same shading ideas, you'll get a decent idea of where lighting should fall. It's not perfect, as skulls do have more lumps, but it will work well enough. You can definitely take some time here to go ham shading in the skull in different ways to find some kind of understanding of where the light might pool on it. Now, the reason that we're paying so much attention to the skull is because the rest of the face builds up on it. At this point, in a more in-depth tutorial, I would talk about muscle formations and how they affect facial structure, but that can get pretty overwhelming when you're newer, so maybe that'll be a tutorial for another time. But for now, let's just remember that the rest of the face sits over top of the skull, so when we're drawing the form of the head, we want to build out from those bones. Now look at this nightmare fuel. Terrifying, right? But don't worry, it'll get better. For now, I just kind of want to show you that the same shading from the skull can be applied to the facial form. You just have to move it around a bit because of the expansion of the form from adding skin. Don't worry about practicing on this green sketch though, because we're about to clean it up. Isn't that so much better? Let's get a bit more in depth on how the colors on skin work though, shall we? I've included a few different colors of skin in the assets below, but for now, let's do this part on a new layer with the hard round brush with pen pressure set to opacity. If you don't have pen pressure, change your opacity to about 10 to 30% when doing this part, and I'll explain why afterwards. So on our first layer, human blood is typically red, right? We can all agree on that? Here's something you might not agree with though. Skin is actually translucent. There is pigment in it, which is what dictates our skin tones, but our skin is actually an organ made up of layers and layers and layers of skin cells. all of which are mostly see-through. This means that some of the color of the blood is visible through the skin. This is extra noticeable in places where a lot of blood is stored and where the skin is thinner, like in places that your body bends. On the next layer, shadow can be any color, but often is affected by the object it's shading. In this case, I'm using a dark, desaturated red because of the base redness of the skin, but skin doesn't always have to be shaded with a red tone. The third layer has me adding highlights to the skin in a super desaturated and light yellow color, as that's a good simple color for the example. I decided it was a little too intense though and lowered the opacity on that layer. Skin is fairly porous and so it doesn't have to have a lot of shine, but depending on product that might be used on the skin, age and tightness of the skin, and even skin tone, light can bounce a lot more intensely off of it. So that's something to keep in mind when adding your highlights. And layer 4 is me adding the more intense highlights with a harder edge directly where the light hits to give the illusion of a more direct light. Softer edges imply more diffusion in light and often means a softer light, where harder edges in lighting mean the light is bright, close, quick enough to not be fully processed by your eyes like a camera flash, or a combination of any and all of them. I didn't include it in this example, but skin can also be affected by environmental colors. For instance, if you hold a neon green piece of paper up near your face, your skin is going to look more green because of the light bouncing off the paper. Your skin likes to pick up outside colors, so remember to play around with random additional colors in lighting and shading from time to time. That said, now that we've seen how this works on one skin tone, I want to show you a trick. These rules do not change much with different skin tones. There can be slight differences, like before I said that more light bounces off of darker skin, which means shines are generally more intense and there's less diffusion, but otherwise, this is a good baseline for how to set up the colors on a face. Before we move on, this is a good time to remind you that I am not going to be going in depth about any specific facial features today. I will be covering them in the future, so if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button for updates on when that'll happen, and let me know in the comments which ones to prioritize. So let's practice applying this together with rendering. In the assets, I've included 4 different heads in different styles. I've also included some color suggestions to use as a baseline for the skin. This is a great time to do lots of different practices on those 4 heads with as many of those colors as you want. I lock my layer and then choose these 4 colors, but make sure that you're comfortable drawing more human skin before going off with the wild skin tones so that you know you've got the idea down before moving on. I'm going to start with this guy on the top left and toss those colors on his skin. Blood, shadow, deep shadow, light, highlight. So first I'm adding in a quick shadow with the light based on the right side of the screen. And I'm blocking in where that sits for the side of the face as well as the facial features. Underneath the eyes will have a lot of shadow, underneath the nose will have a lot of shadow, and underneath the lips will have a little bit too. The chin will too, but I think I get to that later. Next, I'm going to get that secondary shadow, the one with a bit more of that red in it, so that we can really depict where the blood is pooling on the skin. I do frequently forget the ears exist, so I'm glad that I shaded that in. Next, I'm adding in that red where the blood tends to pool in the lighter colors of the skin. This is going to be on the cheeks, a little teeny tiny bit on the brow, a little bit on the nose, a little bit on the chin, and then in the lips, and a lot in the neck. A lot of blood travels through the neck. I'm going to use a soft round brush to do the red skin part. That is going to get us a softer look for where that blood is pooling. Next, I'm going to add some highlights. I'm going to start with a pretty low one and then add in those high highlights. We're using the hard round brush with the opacity setting again this time. And we're going to hit where the light hits, including the side of the face. And then we're adding a little bit of extra shadow to fill out where the forms of the face move that I may have missed a little bit. We're not done, but let's put up a baseline before taking the next step. When we finish the base for the first guy, we're going to move on to Green Anime Girl here. I'm going to say her blood is red too, so we don't get too complicated for now. I'll use a blue shadow and a green highlight. We're going to start with red for the green girl too. I would normally pick like a blue or a purple or something that kind of goes a little bit better with the green, but this time that's fine. However, we are going to use a blue shadow for her. And we're not going as deeply shaded as we would with other faces because anime faces are a little bit more flat and whiter. So we don't want to push too much of a shape on the face. Now we're going to use a light, almost white green highlight for the highlights on this one. And completely forget about the ear again. We're also going to then add a few additional shadows here and there. Next, we'll do me, but I've got my summer tan. I have olive skin, so that color is actually pretty close if I've been in the sun for more than 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and shade from the left side of the screen for this one. And we're going to not be as intense with all of the different colors we choose. But we are going to use a little bit of that deeper shadow color and then go in with some red for the blood. And then we're going to go ahead and use some highlights on the skin and really accent where those highlights are going to sit. We're going to add a little bit of extra shading here too. And that's it really for that one. And last, let's do this girl on the bottom right. Shout out to anyone else who mixes up their lefts and rights. I literally had to correct my script after checking twice before writing right or left in, and I still messed up. So we're going to start out with that red color for where the blood pools. We're going to use a little bit of a darker red color for this one because of the darker skin. That isn't always necessary, but that's what I wanted to do with this one. We're going to soften those shadows out just a little bit because this is a much softer art style. And then we're going to go in with an even darker red for those deep shadows. And those are going to be where the folds of the skin are, where the chin is blocking off the light to the neck, in between the ears, which I again forget about, underneath the hair, and in between the hair and the cheek. We're also going to use that color around a little bit and underneath the nose and get a little bit deeper of a shadow there. Next, we're going to go in with a pretty colorful highlight to start because the diffusion on this is going to be a little more colorful, I think. And we're going to hit the cheekbones and the more top side of the nose and the forehead with this color, as well as the chin. And then we're going to use an even brighter highlight, and this will be our desaturated and lighter color. And we're going to put that anywhere that the light would really reflect. Again, this is where oils collect in the skin. This is where skin will be more stretched out or smoother, and it's generally going to be a lot brighter for younger people because their skin is more stretched. I'm going to go ahead and add a few more dark shadows in places where the light doesn't hit as well. And then I think that's it for this one. I do have these colors saved in the assets too. If you'd like to start from here so that you can practice the next step right away, go ahead and use those. This is where the magic happens. We're going to take our super soft brush, which is also in the assets I gave you, but for those of you who can't use those brushes, it's a basic round brush set to 0% hardness with spacing set to 29%, opacity set to pen pressure, and size set to pen pressure with a 24% minimum diameter. If you don't have pressure sensitivity, in this next part, I suggest turning your brush down to about 20% opacity and you'll achieve a similar result. We're going to press Alt to color pick the areas on the skin religiously. I'm talking a new color with each new brush stroke, and then we're going to smooth out most of these hard edges in the skin. We do want to keep hard edges where there's a drastic change, like where the eyes turn into the cheek, because the light will be more intense, but otherwise it's all got to be smoothed out. We're going to press Alt to color pick the colors pretty much over and over again for the entire image. And we're going to go ahead and use the soft brown brush to just soften everything, because softening these shadows and these lights, that's what's going to really push the round form of the face. If faces were a little more boxy, we wouldn't want such soft edges, because we really only use hard edges for when something stops abruptly, when it's especially shiny, things like that. And you'll notice that I do use those rough edges for the lighting in some of these spots, like right on the top of the cheek where the eyelid and the cheek connect. The cheek is going to have a lot more light and the eyelid's going to get a little darker because of that fold in the skin. We're going to go ahead and blend out those shadows. really push the form of the eyelid as round with the softening of the color there. We're doing the same thing with the nose. We're going to soften that color a couple of times, add in a high highlight, and really make sure that it looks round there. Even though the nose doesn't really exist in anime, you still shade around it as if it did. Now with anime, a lot of the color change is subtle, so after I've done the basic smoothing, I'm going to grab the original skin color and use that same soft brush over the whole face to make the shadow and light a lot more subtle. And then we're going to go through and take a much higher desaturated green light and hit all of the highest spots of light with that color so we can really push the intensity of that light. We're going to go back to the upper left guy next, and we're going to keep a more realistic look to this one. So we want a bit more of the noticeable differences in some places, but some subtle change in others. Deep shadow and intense light both obscure what an object looks like, and it's no different for skin. So we're going to let the neck and jawline blend into each other a bit here. I tried to grab from the lines a couple of times here because I wanted to have that really dark shadow in that spot. Didn't work out for me. That's why you keep seeing me randomly add light instead of darkness. It's fine. I did want to give him a little bit more of an angular face, so that side of the face I used harder lines for. I did the same thing with the highlights on the cheeks. I went with more intense triangles to really push those angles. We're just going to soften out those colors that we've already placed, leaving some hard lines where light would hit a little bit more intensely. The amount of times that I color pick a new color during this process is kind of absurd, but it works for me, so you know. I also just don't really know what else to say here, so I'm just kind of rambling, you know. Anyway, we're gonna soften out those highlights a little bit, and then we're gonna make this shadow like incredibly dark. So the way that your eyes process light and shadow, they don't really recognize shape differences if all of it's in shadow. So we're trying to push that in that section of the face where there's a lot of shadow. And then we're lighting up right under the mouth where the cheeks start to extend. And that's all of that one. Next, we're doing the bottom right girl, and she's also more realistic, but with a softer semi-realism over the hard comic realism of the guy. We're gonna soften out her shadows a lot more than his and really play up those highlights. I also changed the line work color to slightly darker than the darkest shadow color since I realized the original color was detracting from the look of the skin. We're softening out all of the colors. We are avoiding her hair just because, yes, there would be light and shadow there too, but I generally do that on the hair layer. You can do it on this layer if you want, especially if you want to keep that side more bald than with hair. Anyways, this particular style is a much more soft and cutesy style than the guy we just did. So we're softening those colors out a lot. We're trying to keep the color really saturated here. And we're doing that because this style is typically a much more colorful one. I'm once again religiously color picking as much as possible, but even more so with this one because we're trying to keep it as soft as we are. And the funny thing is that when you're looking at it head on and you're like really close to it, you don't really notice how much it looks like a face until you kind of zoom out a bit. And I definitely hit myself with the draw the rest of the owl meme all the time while I'm drawing faces, so I'm sorry if I did the same thing to you. I tried to explain it, I promise I did. And then we're just going to keep on moving with these highlights. The highlights, like I said, we're doing really intensely because of the color of the skin and like how young she is, and also because of the style. This particular style, like I said, is much more cutesy, so the highlights are going to be a lot more intense. Also remember that there is a little shadow between the brow and the nose. Your nose dips in just a little bit, so that shadow is shown when you're rendering. And at this point, it's kind of just completing the face, so instead of speeding it up, I'm gonna let music play until I'm done with this one. And lastly, me. I forgot the shadow from my front bang here, so oops. Otherwise, I prefer a hard shadow to this style, but I wanted to show how soft, subtle shading should look on a similar style. So here's what I got. So now with this little cartoon me, we do still want to soften out all of the features, so we're going to use a big soft brush for a lot of it and come through with the tiny brush for like the major highlights or the big shadows at the end. We do want to really soften out all of the colors pretty much entirely. So we're mostly avoiding very intense colors for the highlight and shadow. Typically we would use cell shading here, but instead I opted for a very gentle shading and lighting to give just a very basic roundness. And then I went ahead and added in some colors just to kind of show what the skin looks like without all the messy stuff in between. So that's the basic application to this rendering process. I've included a coloring page which looks like this for us to practice together on with a little more going on so we can play around with environmental factors. I'm leaving my process for the face at normal speed so that you can practice with me, but after I finish working on the face, I move on to the hand and apply a similar process. I sped that up as that's not the focus for this video, as well as me flatting in the other colors. So right now I'm filling in all of the skin, and by all of it I mean not nearly all of it because I forgot that her chest was skin. And I missed the spot on her neck, and of course I forgot the ears because who the fuck needs ears, am I right? I'm going to start by blocking in the base skin tone, locking my layer, and adding in the reds, shadows, and highlights. That hair is going to cause a lot of shadows, as well as the hand in front of her face and her piercings. So I try to account for that early. Now I'm going to take that hard, low opacity brush, and I'm going to add in some of the base highlights. This is going to be where the light scatters, like we showed before, but this time with more detail. Since we have the shadow coming from a top-down perspective and the hair is there and her face is angled more downwards, we are going directly into that like blood shadow before going directly into the light. And then we're going to go back and add the nose highlights and then hit some of the skin with a softer light. After that, we're going to get that really vibrant highlight, and that's going to go in all of the oily places. Again, I'm going for a more young looking character here, so she's going to have tighter skin, which means that her skin is going to reflect more light. And then we're adding in some more deep shadow, and this is going to be like the darker shadow that we go for. I don't think the darkest, I think we go one more dark, but this is going to be where a lot of our shadows kind of sit. And we're going to use the same shadow under the hair. And then we're going to add more highlights, this time where the mouth is and a little bit on the chin, where the light doesn't hit nearly as much, but it's still going to hit just as intensely. So we're only going to add a little bit of it. And then we're kind of just defining the shape of the face with the shadows right now. And again, I have a lot more work to do than words to say, so I'm going to go ahead and let music play until we get to the next important bit. Next, I do the basic smoothing out with that super soft brush, and then use the super soft brush again to add in darker shadow and brighter highlights. Alright, now we're going in with our super soft round brush, and we're smoothing out those cheeks and pretty much everything else. And as you can see, I'm kind of coloring over the hand. I clean that up and go over and paint it again later. So that isn't really something I worry about at this point. If you wanted to do the hand on a separate layer, you could do that too. I just don't. That's the whole thought, I guess. We're putting a little bit of shadow right above the bump on the nose, which isn't as bumpy as you would think, so you don't want to go too overboard with that shadow. And then we're smoothing out the cheeks some more, trying to make them round without making them puffy. We don't want to diffuse the light too much because it starts to make her look older. But we do want to make sure that we are giving her a nice round face, making it so that it actually pops out rather than just being flat. We're going to add in some additional shadow as we go too, just to make sure that the details are popping the way that they need to. Now here we're going through and bringing in some more of that highlight and trying to get more of the areas lit up that would be. I will add an additional highlight to that later and make it a little bit stronger, but right now we're just kind of creating the form. And speaking of creating the form, we're going to do the same thing with the nose here where we round it out a little bit more as we go. And then we're going to get, I think this is the darkest shadow that I use. We're going to go ahead and put that mostly underneath the chin. We're going to use a little bit of a highlight to lighten up the chin as well so that you can really see that it exists. And then we're going to use that darker color to create a shadow underneath the hand as well. Now we're just smoothing out the skin some more. I feel like this is a good time to ask if you've all enjoyed me doing this voiceover without a script, because honestly, editing it has been a nightmare. So if you like it, I'll do it again, but if you don't, then I will never do it again. So let me know how you feel about it in the comments. In the meantime, we're finishing up with this darker color and then getting that bright hit of highlight like I said we would to go underneath the eyes. And we don't want to go overboard with this. We only want to use a little bit of it, but we do want to use it in those spots where the light would hit more. So underneath the eyes where the cheeks start to pop out, underneath the mouth where it starts to open, on top of the mouth where it sits out a little bit. Just a tiny little highlight on that bump of the nose. Like I said, it's not much. I work the skin as much as needed, fixing parts I've missed and adding instant gratification highlights to parts of the skin that collect more oil or get stretched out more and therefore will be shinier. And of course, we're adding shade under the jewelry as well. Like I said, I did also render that hand, but I did just put a quick rush on the rendering for it, as well as adding in the flats for the rest of the image, just so that you could kind of see how the skin sits when there's stuff on top of it and around it. And here's where I am on this one so far. Thanks for joining me on this tutorial and sticking with me to the end. I hope it helps. Remember, if you color this one, to post your results and tag me and Archer K Face Render. If you have any questions about anything in the video or have any suggestions for future paint-along videos, please let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, please drop me a like and hit me with that subscribe button for more tips and tricks on art improvement, as well as art memes, tutorials, and other artistic support. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!